Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Video Trends, What to Expect in 2023. I'm your host, Paul Verna, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence in New York, and I'm joined by my colleague, Senior Analyst Ross Benish, also in New York. Hey, Ross, great to have you here.
Hey, Paul.
Before we get into the main presentation, I'd like to thank QuickFrame by Mountain for making today's webinar possible, and I'd like to welcome Catharine Meketa-Poirot, Managing Vice President at QuickFrame by Mountain. Catharine is joining us from the great state of New Jersey. Hi, Catharine.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Ross. How you guys doing?
Great. So a few things before we dive in today. We have a lot of information to share, but there's no need to take notes. We'll email you a link to view the slides and the full recording. But we do want you to participate. So just use the chat window on the right to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. So with that, Ross, let's get started. What's on the agenda today?
I'm going to discuss advertising, audience, and content trends. The biggest trend in advertising is that streaming is making gains on TV. That isn't news to anyone, but what's interesting is that the gains that streaming is making are bigger in time spent than they are in ad spending. So if we look at subscription OTT, that's just paid streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and Disney+. If we compare that to linear television in the United States, we'll see that subscription OTT is only going to be, it's going to soon reach half of time spent in 2023. But on an ad spending basis, it's only 1/6. So OTT is at the point where it's about half of television ad spending, time spent, but only about 1/6 of the ad spend. But the reason that there's such a stark difference in terms of how much share it's gaining in viewership compared to advertising is that much of streaming isn't ad supported. Although Netflix and Disney Plus did introduce their ad tiers, most viewers on those services are not using that product. They are in the ad-free product still. And the ad loads are much lighter in streaming. So you only get 4 minutes of ads per hour on HBO Max. Linear television has 15 minutes per hour. So although linear television ad prices are cheaper, the ad loads are so much greater. So as the viewership transitions to streaming, just keep in mind that the ad spending won't be 1-to-1. You're going to see the time spent happen first before the ad spend follows. Now, another way of comparing linear to streaming is to look at CTV specifically. And the difference there between that and our OTT estimate is that CTV is device-based. So it includes any digitally sold ads that are seen on TV screens. So this means that it includes user-generated content on services like YouTube and TikTok. It also includes free services like Pluto TV. So this is a much broader spend category. But even with this broader spend category, CTV isn't yet half of what linear television is. And it won't hit that point until 2025. One way of looking at this is if you combine the total, you get almost $100 billion soon, with about 60 to 70 going to linear, the remaining 20 to 30 going to CTV, and 1/3 of that total will be streaming. That may not sound like much, but prior to COVID, this was a much smaller category. When we did our first ever CTV ad spending estimate, it was only about $7 billion, and television was 70 at the time. So CTV was only 1/10 of TV, and soon it will be half. So that's pretty monumental progress in just a handful of years. But that doesn't change the fact that 2/3 of the spending will still go to linear television for the foreseeable future. So linear TV, even though it's trending in the opposite direction of CTV, it's still very important to marketers' media plans. And part of the way that TV has stayed so relevant and stabilized itself is that upfront spending has stayed flat. It hasn't declined as much as you would think it would, given all the cord cutting that's happened. Networks have been successful in raising prices for their upfront inventory. So even though there are these ratings declines, the increase in ad prices brings them to a point where the ad revenues are basically flat. And we're going to basically expect to see that for the next two upfronts, where it's going to be about $20 billion a year, which just helps stabilize that whole industry.
And Ross, can you clarify why this chart has the years in 2-year increments, so 2019 through 2020, 2020 through 2021, et cetera?
That occurs because upfronts are often negotiated on a TV season basis rather than a calendar basis. So many new shows have their new seasons premiere in the fall, and then they run through the spring and they're off in the summer. And advertisers will commit their money on that cycle. So a 2022 upfront commitment could have some spend going toward the second half of 2022 and the first half of 2023. They don't peg the commitments to January to December. Some do, but most do not peg their commitments that way. They are doing it based on the TV schedule. Now, with CTV, which was the 1/3 of the total of TV and streaming ad spending, the biggest trend there is that the ad dollars are spreading out. Pre-COVID, 3 companies, Roku, Hulu, and YouTube, were half the market. No one else had a billion-dollar ad business in this field. So if you wanted to run a scalable campaign, those were your 3 primary options. But those companies' combined share has declined. And it'll be closer to 1/3 soon. They still are growing their revenues. Roku and Hulu will grow year over year, even though they've had some misses lately. YouTube did just post its first ever quarterly revenue decline, but all 3 of these companies still have robust businesses. It's just that the rest of the market has expanded faster. That's due to new services such as Netflix, Disney, and HBO introducing advertising. We've seen a growth of programmatic outside of Google, which has led to boosted revenues for the Trade Desk and Magnite. Amazon has become much more active in CTV advertising. Although Prime Video doesn't feature ads in most of its programming, Amazon has shifted more content to its free service, Amazon Freevee, which is ad-supported, and it's embedded Freevee into the Prime Video and into the Fire TV interface that makes it indistinguishable for consumers. And they're selling ads against live sports like the NFL and New York Yankees home games. And we're seeing some increase in social video activity on TV screens. TikTok has hired some CTV-specific roles. They are primarily a mobile platform, but they are heading into CTV, which is captured into this estimate. And what's important for marketers is just that you don't just have 3 billion-dollar ad businesses anymore. You have a handful of companies that have scaled to the point where you can run pretty significant campaigns and reach a lot of people just on that one service. Netflix is the most notable of the new services to introduce advertising. They just introduced ads about a month ago after famously denying advertising for many years. And although they are the biggest company in streaming, they take up about 1/4 of the time spent people spend watching streaming services, according to Comscore. They're going to be a little slow out the gates with the ad business. They won't be $1 billion in the US right away, but they will be by the end of 2024. And the reason they're going to be a little slow out the gates is because they're doing this for the first time. They have to, consider customer experience. They've had to partner with Microsoft to get this off the ground quicker. Had to hire executives from other companies and build up an ad sales team. So it's really a new venture for Netflix, and most of its viewers for the upcoming year are going to stay on the ad-free plan. It's going to be a slow transition. Disney Plus is a service that just introduced ads where we expect a faster transition to advertising. And Disney Plus isn't Disney Plus may be having ads for the first time, but this isn't new to the parent company. And that's part of the reason why we think they'll break $1 billion in their first full year of having an ad business, despite only accounting for 5% of streaming time, according to Comscore. So Disney Plus can lean on Disney's ad sales team. They've been selling linear TV for decades. They control Hulu and ESPN Plus as well. And the company has a way to integrate their product with all the other streaming services, TV networks, merchandise, and theme parks that they can offer pretty heavy cross promotions and subsidies. And this can really incentivize people to take on the cheaper ad-supported plan. Disney has grown Hulu's ad business pretty significantly by discounting the ad-supported plan in its bundle. That's led to 2/3 of Hulu viewers choosing the ad-supported plan. And for Hulu, they actually make more money on the cheaper ad-supported plan than they do on the more expensive ad-free plan because they've jacked up the ad load so much, and streaming ad prices are pretty expensive right now. And Disney Plus has this option as well. If they really want to grow their revenues, they can lean on those company resources and in the bundle to nudge people to adopt its ad product much quicker than a service like Netflix has the ability to.
And Ross, speaking of Disney Plus and their ad loads, and earlier you talked about the comparison of ad loads between linear TV and streaming. Can you talk a little bit about the ad experience on CTV, and particularly the complaint that a lot of people have that they keep seeing the same ads over and over again?
Yeah, the ad experience can be pretty rough, and you do often see the same ad over and over again. There's many reasons for why that is, why there's such a frequency capping problem. But one of the biggest is just over-targeting. With linear TV, advertisers could buy that one ad spot, and every person, all the millions of people who watched Abbott Elementary could see that same Toyota ad, let's see. But now advertisers will go for something very specific. They may be looking for couples who live within 100 miles of Pittsburgh, who have a combined income of $300,000, who are in market for an SUV. And that particular streaming service might not have enough viewers to fulfill the campaign order. And so the viewers who do fit the criteria of what's being targeted are just met with an onslaught of that ad to fulfill the order. And it's just a rough experience for consumers. And another pretty persistent problem is that with streaming, there are so many ways that the advertising is sold. You could go straight to the streaming service like Disney Plus. You can go to a TV network like NBCU. You can buy programmatically through the Trade Desk. You could buy through the device that you're watching it on, like a Samsung or a Fire TV. And there's other ways to buy too. And those systems may have their own frequency capping in place, but they don't all communicate. So that one SUV ad may have hit the frequency for as far as the programmatic company is concerned, but maybe that ad buyer also bought directly from the TV network, and now they're running that same ad too. And the viewer doesn't see any of this happening on the back end. All they know is they saw the same ad 13 times within an hour-and-a-half movie, and it's extremely frustrating, and the problem has persisted. The biggest audience trend in 2023 is that those who pay for television will be outnumbered for those who don't. And just to be more clear, this is traditional TV only. So that black line is looking at people who pay for traditional cable, satellite telecom providers. Cord cutting has eroded that audience so much that the combined cord cutters and cord nevers will actually exceed pay TV viewers for the first time by the end of next year. However, there's another way to analyze this data, and that's because there's about 14 million households that have adopted virtual cable services. The industry jargon that is used is VMVPD because the ad industry loves an acronym. And what this is referring to is services like Sling TV and Hulu Live TV and Fubo that offer you live TV. They're offering you, the basic cable channels like Comedy Central and AMC, but they're doing so in a way that's delivered over the internet. And if you combine those viewers with the traditional cable companies, you're still seeing audience erosion, but not nearly as significantly. And under this framework, cord cutters and cord nevers will not outnumber pay TV viewers for the next few years. It'll probably be a good 5 years from now before these lines cross if you're including VMVPDs. Now, this chart really just gives some more context on what all of that audience erosion means. Linear TV time spent used to eclipse digital TV time spent very significantly. And this is for the whole population. But as people have been leaving their pay TV bundles, you've been seeing digital video make gains. And we're at the point now where within a year and a half or so, there will be more time spent with digital video than there will be with traditional television. And that's really important for marketers to consider because they have to go where the audience is. But digital video is a huge category. This isn't just streaming. About half of the digital video total is streaming, but the rest is it's a ton of stuff that goes into it, including mobile video, stuff you're watching on your apps, video that is on publishers' websites like the Wall Street Journal or USA Today, and social video is a big component. So, looking at outstream video ads on your Instagram feeds, that counts as digital video, although it's not streaming. So that black bar there is encompassing of all digital video formats. But even though it's a large category, it's still pretty breathtaking that it will finally, after years of getting close to this point, overtake television as the medium where people are spending their most time with video. Now, to be more specific about the streaming audience, most US residents are already using CTV, so we're not seeing a ton of growth as far as bringing in new viewers. 3/4 of people who use the internet are already watching content on a connected television. And that includes whether it's a smart TV that already has internet built in, or they're using an external device like a game console or a Roku stick plugged into their TV to connect. So you're just seeing a few percentage points increase for the next few years, where the growth is coming and why the ad spend has grown so significantly is that people who already are CTV viewers are just doing much more of it. Light viewers are becoming moderate viewers. Moderate are becoming heavy viewers. And this is happening while streaming services are trying to find new revenue streams to get closer to profitability. So more services are introducing ads, and the ones who already have ads keep increasing their ad load. So you have a few things that are contributing to a huge bump in CTV inventory, even though the number of individuals coming in each year is minimal.
Ross, going back to the audience chart and the growth, I noticed that there was kind of a growth acceleration leading up to 2020, and I'm wondering if that was strictly pandemic related, or had the growth been accelerating more for natural reasons up to that point?
That is something that's influenced by COVID-19. We were anticipating that the CTV viewership growth would start leveling off sooner, but then we got a brief bump there for about a year and a half with people locked in their homes. Brought some more people online to stream video, and that led us to raise those figures a little bit. So we have a few other metrics that break down streaming viewership and where it's going for the next few years. The biggest one is our OTT viewer figure, and that's just anyone who streams video across any device. So watching Netflix on your phone or Hulu on your tablet, that includes everything, including YouTube. And it's pretty significant. It's getting to the point where we'll soon be 250 million people. And almost all these people will pay for a streaming service. Subscription OTT is at about the same size. So although people are becoming more selective about how many services they will pay for, almost everyone who streams pays for at least a Netflix or a Prime Video or a Disney Plus. The 20 million people that don't pay for anything but still stream, those are primarily individuals who only watch YouTube. So and then our AVOD figure is the ad-supported portion of all this. It includes paid ad services like Hulu. You have to pay a subscription fee for Hulu, even if you're on the cheaper plan that has advertising, as well as the free services like Pluto TV that have advertising and don't require a subscription fee. And that's getting a little bit of a bump this year too. In 2023, we're going to expect that to grow by about 15 million people. That's more than it had grown in the previous 2 years. And the reason that the growth jumped up a little bit and we raised the forecast is because Disney Plus and Netflix didn't have advertising before. And now that they are adopting advertising, there will be some people who were avoiding streaming ads before who will now be exposed to them as they switch to a lower tier. And then our last large category of streaming metrics are the free premium services. These are known as FASTs in the industry, free ad-supported streaming television. They refer to services like Tubi, Roku Channel, IMDb TV, and Pluto TV. And the viewership on these has increased pretty dramatically. It's more than doubled since prior to COVID, but it's still less than half of all streaming viewers. And the main takeaway there is just that most streaming is still happening on paid services. Even though the free services are growing, when you look at where people are spending their time, it's usually on a subscription service like Hulu or Netflix. This data is from TiVo, and they asked consumers what types of streaming services they use and how many they use. And they found that about 1/3 of streaming services in the middle of this year were free. But that is a growth though. So even though 1/3 of streaming services that people use are free, that's up from about 1/4 in the previous year. But another way of viewing that is just that 2/3 is still happening on the subscription side. And that's just looking at number of services used. On a time spent basis, subscription viewing is even greater because if people pay for a service, they tend to use it more, almost like a sunk cost. And this data captures that. This is looking specifically at subscription OTT viewing. So it's excluding YouTube, Pluto TV. It's only looking at things that people pay for like Disney Plus and Netflix. And next year, it's going to break 1.5 hours per day. And that's among the whole population. That includes people like my father who don't use Netflix at all. If you look at streaming viewers only, this number would be significantly higher. But with the whole population, in just a handful of years, we went from less than 1 hour per day streaming to 1.5 hours per day, more than a 50% bump from before COVID times. We saw a pretty substantial increase in 2020 during the lockdowns. But even as things opened up, it didn't go back to where it was before. Time spent with streaming, it went from a huge jump to incremental growth from there. And we're going to continue to see bumps of about 4 to 5 minutes per year across the whole population. And that's part of the reason why that ad inventory is growing so much. Now with content, I'm predicting that next year we're finally going to see a flattening in the number of shows that are greenlit. And people have been saying this for a while, including some Fox executives who helped create this data in the first place. But I feel the market conditions are really ripe that we're not going to see a jump of 50 more shows produced in the following year like we had been. It's become unsustainable to have 600 scripted shows produced each year. And this is scripted shows, so that doesn't include reality television or game shows. If you included all of that, this number would be probably around 2,000 shows. But with scripted series, streaming services are becoming much more selective. HBO Max is probably the most prominent. They've been cutting shows even before they debut. They just removed Westworld from their service, which was one of their most popular shows about 5 years ago. And they're not the only ones. Netflix has urged investors to look more at their revenue than at subscriber growth, whereas they used to heavily lean on subscriber growth to boost their company's valuation. Paramount Global has indicated that they are going to do some belt tightening with content spending as well. And this is all happening because streaming services are having to show profitability. You can't just have runaway spending and runaway financial losses anymore. And one way to show profitability is to cut your costs and to stop greenlighting every idea that a B-list celebrity pitches your studio head. And that's why next year, flat on show production and probably eventually a decline within a few years. And as this happens, streaming services are going to change up how they offer their products. You're seeing this now with Disney and Netflix adding advertising, but you're also seeing some services are going to get into the free game. HBO Max is combining with Discovery Plus. HBO used to be the most high-end premium cable channel in America. Now it's going to help operate a free streaming service that will lean heavily on Shark Tank and 90 Day Fiancé. Peacock uses this approach. They have 3 tiers, including one tier that has part of its content in front of the paywall, and it's monetized through advertising. Paramount Global basically uses this approach, although Pluto TV is a separate service from Paramount Plus and Showtime. It still functions much in the same way. And using this multi-tiered approach will help diversify revenues, so streaming services aren't relying as heavily on subscription fees, and they can lean more on advertising. It also helps them make money off of people who leave their service, because inflation has led to subscription churn. And as people have become more choosy about which services they'll pay for, the media companies who run those services still want to maintain a relationship and make money off those people. So if someone leaves HBO Max subscription, Warner Media could still make money off them through the free service, through the advertising. More importantly, they can maintain the relationship with that consumer, because streaming is very competitive, and consumers don't have enough space in their heads at a given time to be aware of all the offerings that all the streaming services have. But if someone is in the habit of using a service, even if it's the free tier, they can be upsold to a pricier subscription tier, particularly when their favorite shows are coming out with new seasons. These free services are also distinguishing themselves. When they first launched, services like Tubi and Crackle and Pluto had very similar content libraries. They were mostly just licensed old shows and movies. But now they're striking some exclusives with their licensing deals, and they're also making original productions. Roku just had a pretty popular biopic. Well, I guess you could call it biopic. It was more fictional than it was nonfiction. They had a movie about Weird Al recently starring Daniel Radcliffe that did very well for them. And you should expect to see more of this. Even though the big players like Paramount and Netflix and HBO are going to become choosier about how they're funding content, some of these new services will become new buyers of shows. And as this happens, the term original will become a little bit more of a misnomer. The most buzzy shows will still stay originals. They will still stay exclusive. A show like Stranger Things is very important to Netflix. The Mandalorian and the Star Wars franchise is very important to Disney Plus. Those shows will be exclusive to their platforms. But a lot of other shows that gets produced will become licensed out. And this is already happening. The shows like Stranger Things and Mandalorian are actually in the minority. Most programs have multiple modes of distribution. A hit show right now is Abbott Elementary. You can watch that on linear television through ABC, and you could stream it on Hulu as well as HBO Max. And there's going to continue to be deals like that, and the studios will continue to license to other streaming services that are owned by competing media companies. So our main takeaways from all this is that when you look at the combined television and streaming ad spending, streaming will be 1/3 of that total soon. That's pretty significant because pre-COVID, it was only 1/10 of the total. Cord cutting will just keep happening. Traditional pay TV viewers will be outnumbered by cord cutters and cord nevers very soon. And that's going to contribute to digital video having more time spent than television within the end of 2024. And content production will face pressure. You won't see more than 600 scripted shows produced in 2023, and that's because streaming services have to focus more on profit and being more judicious with how they spend their money. And with that, I kick it back to you, Paul.
Hey, that was great, Ross. Thank you. So before we get to your questions live, and we've had a lot of good ones come in so far, but please keep them coming. I'd love to bring back in our special guest, QuickFrame by Mountains, Catharine Meketa-Poirot. Welcome again, Catharine.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Catherine, let me start with this question. Do you think brands will need to adjust their creative approach as ad-supported streaming tiers roll out, like on Disney, Netflix, Apple, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul. Many of you may have noticed that Netflix recently released their ad specs, and well, for the majority, they do look similar to the OTT and CT platforms that we're used to that are ad supported. There is one major difference, and that's around picture quality. What this means is that brands that want to run ads on these more premium platforms have to actually produce ads that are of the same quality content as the programming. Now, that's obviously going to be an obstacle for brands who aren't accustomed to producing more, complex, higher priced productions or videos or commercials. So what this means is obviously it's going to be a trickle down effect, right? It's going to, affect budgeting. And I think what we're going to see is that some brands won't be able to access some of those networks, right? Just because the cost will be prohibitive to them, even though there are ways to bring down costs for, a more premium spot.
So what about ad lengths? I mean, you talked about picture quality, but there's been a lot of talk about attention spans and more 15-second instead of 30-second ads, and in many cases even shorter, because especially on social platforms, there's always the option to scroll past or skip ads.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, especially when you see that we're pretty much creating 6-second ads for a lot of social platforms. So, the consumer's attention span is diminishing for sure. As you may know, QuickFrame was acquired by Mountain, which is a CTV platform focused on delivering performance. And we actually at Mountain require that brands provide both a 30 and a 15. So it's something that, is really important to us. We need to obviously present that longer narrative, but also present something that's shorter, for the customer that might not be as, readily available to, have an attention span or a wider attention span.
And speaking of attention spans, so TikTok was a major influence on social video in 2022. Do you think that influence will spread to other digital video platforms like connected TV?
Yeah, so I think it's funny that we're going from super, super premium to TikTok because couldn't be more of the polar opposite. Content on TikTok today is what we call super lo-fi. It's typically user-generated content, UGC, done on an iPhone, very easy to produce. It's super authentic in feel. It's fun, it's light, it's energetic. In some cases, it's just bizarre, but the consumer it's resonating with the consumer. So I think you'll see a couple things. TikTok's still leading the video trend. I think what we're already seeing and we'll continue to see next year is brands running that same TikTok content on Meta, particularly in Instagram Reels. And then I think you'll see platforms adopting to that type of content. So what we're seeing with YouTube and YouTube Shorts. In addition to that, well, I guess not in addition to that, but the one catch is that it's not as simple to take UGC and throw it onto CTV or OTT, not just because of the technical requirements, but also because, I don't think the consumer is necessarily ready to see UGC in that viewing environment. Not saying that isn't possible at some point. But for today, it's important that they see something more premium, what we just spoke about with Netflix and Disney, et cetera. What we've already seen happen that I think we'll continue to see happen in 2023 is brands will try to take the spirit of the TikTok ads and translate that into the more premium spot. So I can give you a good example. I think Old Navy was one of the first brands to do it the beginning of this year, where they had a super high quality premium live action shoot, very complex, but they had various audience segments doing TikTok dances. So that was kind of their way to do something more premium, but at the same time be relatable and stay on trend. So I think we'll see more of that next year.
What are some ways that brands can cultivate interactivity between their video ads and their audiences?
Yeah, so you obviously see a lot of AR ads on social platforms this year. You'll continue to see that next year. I think you've seen it for a couple of years. I think you're going to see that augmented reality really gives a brand the opportunity to integrate the consumer into the experience. And then it also just promotes sharing, whether somebody's trying something on, whether it's a try on feature or just a filter, it's fun and it's interactive and it's engaging. So it prompts consumers to want to share it and play with it. And then that obviously, creates a better connection with the brand. Obviously, from a CTV perspective, it's a little bit different. I think what we saw this year were QR codes. If anybody tuned into the Super Bowl, I think we all got some waves from the Coinbase ad, but I think you'll just see more of that. But the key with QR codes is that you have to present some type of opportunity to the consumer. It's not just about them going to your site. Like, you have to give them some type of offer or some type of exclusive access. So I think that's going to be key. To kind of build on that, we also see, innovation in CTV with something like the feature on Roku, where you can actually press a button, buy now, and that'll allow you to buy products that are featured in ads directly from your TV. That's pretty cool. I mean, that's, something that I think we're going to see more and more of. So definitely excited to see what next year brings.
Yeah, I was going to ask about shoppable ads because that seems to be the next frontier. I mean, you talked about the sharing and the filters, and the, maybe softer ways that users can interact with ads, but definitely, at the point where you can shop directly, whether it's on CTV or even social video, which I know is done now, but we seem to be in the sort of early stages of that. So that seems like a great opportunity going forward. So with all the new ad-supported streaming options, will audiences see more video ads in 2023 than they did in 2022? And do you think this increase will affect consumer sentiment over video ads?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question. Having been in the advertising business for 20 plus years, I think with the younger generations, the concern was advertising, they don't want to be sold. They're not particularly brand loyal. The good news for advertisers is that most consumers, or 70% or more in a lot of the studies that we see, aren't necessarily, they're expecting to see advertising incorporated into content. I think that there's a couple things happening. So I don't think that there will necessarily be a negative sentiment to video because it's more engaging. I will say that the challenge for brands is in making sure they keep their content fresh. Because if a consumer continues to engage on certain platforms, watching their favorite show, or on social, and they keep seeing the same exact spot or the same exact video, day in and day out and month over month, it's not going to be a positive experience from the consumer. So, emphasizing not just how important it is to diversify your platform mix, but also to constantly iterate. And even when you produce content, don't just produce one video or one concept, produce many concepts, make sure you're always testing and learning. And, you'll have a kind of more shots on goal, I guess, right? And then the only other thing that I would add to that is I think consumers are savvy enough to know that they're getting more affordability from, streaming platforms because it's offset from the advertising costs. So I think that because consumers know that, they don't necessarily have a negative connotation with the ads. So, good news, because I was scratching my head for a while there, generation after generation, really wanting authenticity. And I think it's just about focusing on that and really pulling that through your messaging.
Great. Well, thanks, Catherine. Now it's time to get into our audience Q&A. So we did receive a lot of great questions. I'll start with this one. What services are you looking to add streaming forecast for? And I guess this one is for you, Ross.
Sure. Well, Amazon ad spending would be fantastic, but we haven't gotten quite enough information from their business publicly to split that out yet. So what seems more likely is some ad revenues from TV makers like Vizio and Samsung. And we're hoping to add some more viewership figures for Paramount Plus.
Great. And this next question also gets to our methodology or our data breakouts. How does YouTube viewing break down by device?
Well, YouTube is still primarily mobile. but it's just over half of YouTube viewing in the United States that is mobile. And then you have a little over 1/4 is on TV screens, and the rest is split out over various devices like desktop, laptops, tablets, and any other connected device. But although CTV is still only around 1/4, it has come a long way in a short amount of time, and I bet it'll be 1/3 within the next few years.
Right. Going a little further afield, do you expect Netflix to invest in theatrical releases?
No, not right away, unless they become pretty desperate after they launch their advertising business. Right now, theatrical is something Netflix uses to market their movies, and I expect them to continue to use that approach. Well, they'll take something like a Knives Out sequel, put it in a handful of theaters for a few weeks just to generate some buzz, and also to qualify for award nominations. But they haven't given any indication that they want to flip the switch and reserve a bunch of their movies nationwide or even globally for theatrical exclusivity. They seem to be more of a competitor to theater than they are something that would supplement it.
So Ross, you talked in the presentation about a shift from a growth sort of approach by streaming services to profitability. One area we haven't really delved into, and we could spend a whole webinar talking about it, is sports. Is your sense that streaming companies are currently profiting from sports or no?
I don't think they're profiting directly, at least. I mean, you have some services like Peacock and Paramount that are just retransmitting games that they already had the rights for to their TV network. So there's not a lot of the cost there. And maybe they are making some incremental ad revenue on the digitally sold ads against those games viewed on the streaming service. But when you're looking at a game that is on a streaming service exclusively, I don't think they're profiting yet, because the viewership for most of these streaming, Netflix isn't in live sports, and the viewership for other streaming services isn't large enough where you can make enough money on the ad revenue to offset what you're paying for the media rights. Just an example of that would be the NFL Sunday Ticket is being, it's up for bidding right now. And the biggest companies that are bidding on it are the tech juggernauts like Amazon and Google and Apple. And those services will stand to lose a good amount of money given where their subscription streaming services are if they bring it into the fold. However, something like Sunday Ticket is helpful to them, even if they're not profiting right away, because they can use it to market all their other products. And it can help customize people to their streaming service and get people habituated to it, bringing more viewers in. I see sports, at least right now, more as a loss leader for streaming services due to the viewership constraints on the streaming services and the hefty fees required for the rights.
Yeah, I think recently there was an activist investor that was recommending that Disney spin off ESPN. And I think the counter argument to that was that it's part of the whole offering and it may not be as profitable on its own as it was in the cable days, but it still serves a larger purpose within that portfolio. So we have time for 2 more questions. And the first one is, Ross, to your point about the acronyms. So VMVPDs, why has their growth slowed?
Well, that mostly just comes down to pricing. The virtual cable services like Sling TV used to be very cheap. 5 years ago, you could get Sling TV or Hulu Live TV for like $25. And because it was so cheap, it was a much superior alternative to a traditional service like Dish Network or Comcast. But those companies have had to reduce their financial losses because the carriage fees to retransmit broadcast of a cable network are very expensive. You can't profit by selling the bundle for only $25, if you have live sports, that is. So they raised their prices so that they wouldn't lose so much money. And now it's like $70 to subscribe to something like Fubo. And when that happens, it's not a whole lot different than paying for a traditional cable. And because it's so expensive now, much fewer people are adding these services than they were a few years ago.
Great. And the last question we have time for, and Catherine, I don't want to put you on the spot, but feel free to chime in on this if you care to. How do you foresee a 2023 recession potentially affecting the ad environment?
Would you like to take it, Catherine?
Sure. I mean, many will debate this and argue it. I think we've already seen lots of effects of, the recession that we're in or not in. I think that brands obviously know that if they pull too far back, they won't, keep in front of the customer. So I think it's about making smarter decisions and also really thinking about making your what you are spending money on super efficient and super effective. So paying close attention to the data, paying close attention to the platforms that are working the best for you, leaning into those, and just, being on your game, watching the market, being able to pivot very quickly. So I think that we're, if it'll depend on a lot of other variables in the market, but hopefully brands, just continue to spend and just do it much more efficiently and effectively.
Ross, anything to add there?
Yeah, well, I just add that a medium that offers more measurability will fare better than a medium that has limited measurability, and expect branding dollars to take a haircut, whereas direct marketing will probably stay pretty robust.
Yeah, big focus on performance. You're right.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for what it's worth, in our forecasts, we've priced in to the best of our ability what we anticipate, what we've already seen happening in the economy and what we think will happen in the first 6 months of next year, say. We definitely see a lot more impact on social than on CTV and video. In fact, CTV is the fastest growing ad format still in our forecasts, even having just revised it in October, followed very closely by retail media. So something to think about. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So thanks again to Ross for joining us, and a very special thanks to Catherine and to the team at QuickFrame by Mountain. Our eMarketer production crew behind the scenes also deserves a huge thank you for making this webinar possible. As promised, we'll be emailing you soon a link to the slides and the full recording. And before we wrap up, let me just take a quick moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, everywhere you listen to podcasts. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your workday.